The concert hall's marble floor caught the late afternoon light in fragments, scattering gold across Daniel Sullivan's worn sneakers as she pressed herself against the column nearest the service entrance. She had maybe 8 minutes before security rotated shifts. 8 minutes to stand in this cathedral of sound and let the distant piano notes wash over her like rain on cracked earth. Her fingers moved involuntarily against her thigh, tracing the melody she heard bleeding through the practice room doors. Muscle memory from a lifetime ago when her name had meant something different, when her hands had been clean and her future had stretched out bright and unbroken. Preparing and narrating this type of story takes a lot of time and effort. If you like the story, please like the video and subscribe to the channel. If you want to watch every story of our channel, turn on the bell icon. The building smelled like money, not the sharp metallic tang of coins counted in desperation, but the deep, woody scent of wealth that had aged like wine. Leather and polish and the faint ghost of expensive perfume lingering in the air long after its wearer had departed. Daniel had learned to read spaces like this, to understand the architecture of privilege. The Boston Symphony Hall sat in the heart of the city like a jewel box, all ornate detail and hushed reverence. A place where people came to consume beauty they'd paid handsomely to experience. She came because she couldn't stay away, because music was the only language she still spoke fluently, the only country where she still held citizenship. Her backpack, everything she owned compressed into 30 pounds of survival, dug into her shoulders. Inside, 2 changes of clothes rolled tight, a sleeping bag that had seen better winters, a water bottle she refilled at public fountains, a dog-eared paperback she'd read 17 times, toiletries stolen from gas station bathrooms, and wrapped in a plastic grocery bag to keep it safe from the elements. A photograph. Just one. Daniel didn't believe in carrying more weight than necessary, but that photograph was non-negotiable. Her mother's face, forever frozen at 34, forever smiling at a piano recital that had happened in another universe, another lifetime. "Danny, you were born with music in your bones." Her mother used to say, fingers cool against Daniel's forehead when she'd practiced too long and exhaustion pulled at her small body. "Don't ever let anyone convince you that's not worth everything." Worth everything. Daniel almost laughed at the memory, the sound dying in her throat before it could escape and draw attention. At 23, she understood exactly what everything cost. It cost the Juilliard scholarship she'd had to refuse when her mother got sick. It cost the apartment they'd lost 6 months after the funeral. It cost her father, who'd looked at her one morning across a kitchen table they were 3 days from losing and said, "I can't do this anymore," before walking out the door with nothing but his wallet and a decade of grief he couldn't carry. It cost her the music, or so she'd thought, until she discovered that music didn't abandon you even when everything else did. The piano in the practice room shifted into something complex, something that made Daniel's heart clench with recognition. Rachmaninoff, Piano Concerto No. 2, the third movement. She closed her eyes and let her fingers dance against her jeans, playing the invisible keys, feeling the ghost of the music move through her body. She'd performed this piece once, at 17, in a high school auditorium filled with parents holding phones aloft like lighters at a concert. Her mother had been in the front row, already sick but pretending she wasn't, wearing the blue dress that would later get donated to Goodwill along with everything else Daniel couldn't carry. "Hey, you can't be here." Daniel's eyes snapped open. The security guard, Milton, his name tag read, and he had kind eyes that made the dismissal harder somehow, stood 3 feet away, his hand resting on his belt but his face apologetic. She'd gotten sloppy, lost in the memory and the music, hadn't heard him approach. "I know," she said, already moving toward the exit. "I was just leaving." "Yeah." Milton walked with her, not touching but creating a wall of authority that made her compliance inevitable. At the door, he paused, glanced back toward the practice rooms where the Rachmaninoff continued its passionate climb. "You a musician?" Daniel's laugh was bitter. "I was. Once. You should try the community center on Tremont Street. Tuesday evenings. They've got an old upright that needs tuning, but it works. Open to anyone." He pushed the door open, let the cold November air rush in. No one checks IDs or asks questions. She wanted to thank him, but gratitude stuck in her throat like a stone. so she just nodded and stepped out into the city's gray afternoon. The door clicked shut behind her, final as a judge's gavel. She adjusted her backpack and started walking, no destination in mind, just movement for movement's sake because standing still invited attention and attention invited trouble. Boston in November was a study in decay dressed up as elegance. The trees had shed their leaves in artistic piles that the wind scattered and reformed like nature's own chaos theory. People hurried past in expensive coats, faces buried in phones, everyone moving with purpose toward destinations that mattered. Daniel moved between them like a ghost, visible but not seen, present but not acknowledged. She'd perfected this art over 2 years of homelessness, how to occupy space without claiming it, how to exist without taking up room that might be wanted by someone who mattered more. She ended up at the public garden because parks were neutral territory, because the benches were first come first served, and because watching the swan boats sit dormant for winter felt appropriate somehow. Everything sleeping until spring, everything waiting. She sat on a bench that faced the pond and pulled out her water bottle, sipped slowly because she didn't know when she'd find the next fountain. A woman jogging past gave her a look, that particular calculation that happened in seconds, the assessment that ended with averted eyes and quickened pace. Daniel was used to it. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, and she almost didn't check it because charging opportunities were scarce and she tried to keep the battery above 50% for emergencies. But something made her look. A notification from the community center's website, the one Milton had mentioned, the one she'd looked up immediately on the library's public Wi-Fi because hope was a weed that grew in the strangest places. Open piano night this Tuesday, June 9th p.m. All welcome. All welcome. Daniel read those 2 words 3 times, testing them for hidden conditions, for the invisible asterisks that usually followed such pronouncements. All welcome except, all welcome if, all welcome when. But the website was simple, earnest, the kind of bare-bones design that suggested budget constraints and genuine intention rather than polish and pretense. You talking to yourself? Or should I be worried? The voice came from her left, and Daniel turned to find an elderly man settling onto the other end of the bench with the careful movement of someone whose bones had opinions about the cold. He wore a wool coat that had been expensive once, now worn at the cuffs and elbows, and a scarf wrapped high against the wind. His face was weathered but alert, eyes bright with the particular awareness of someone who'd spent time understanding the world from angles most people never considered. Neither, Daniel said. Just reading. Ah, the modern version of talking to yourself. He smiled, and it transformed his face from stern to grandfatherly. Marcus Whitfield. And before you worry, I'm not here to bother you. Just claiming my bench time. This spot and I have an arrangement. 3:30 to 4:15, weather permitting. Despite herself, Daniel smiled. Daniel Sullivan. And I think I might be encroaching on your territory. Nonsense. Bench is big enough for 2 souls contemplating the mysteries of dormant swan boats. He pulled out a thermos from his coat pocket, twisted it open, and the smell of coffee, real coffee, not the burnt swill from convenience stores, drifted between them. You play piano. It wasn't a question. Daniel tensed. What makes you say that? Your fingers. They've been moving against your leg since I sat down, following some melody I can't hear. Marcus poured coffee into the thermos cap, took a sip. I taught music for 40 years. You develop an eye for it. The way musicians move through the world, they're always playing something. Daniel's hands stilled. She didn't know if she should lie, deflect, or just leave. The truth felt too heavy, too complicated for a park bench conversation with a stranger. But Marcus wasn't looking at her with pity or suspicion, just curiosity tinged with something that might have been recognition. I used to play, she said finally. Before. Marcus nodded like this explained everything, and maybe it did. Before was a country everyone left eventually, whether they wanted to or not. And now I'm taking an extended sabbatical from having access to pianos. The joke came out harder than she'd intended, defensive edges showing through attempted levity. Marcus was quiet for a moment, watching the pond where a single duck paddled in circles, either lost or enjoying the solitude. There's a community center on Tremont. I know. I just heard about it. Daniel surprised herself by continuing. I'm thinking about going. Tuesday. You should. Marcus screwed the cap back onto his thermos with precise movements. Music doesn't leave us just because our circumstances change. It waits, patient as stone. He stood, bones creaking in protest. Same time tomorrow, Daniel Sullivan. If you're around. And then he was walking away, leaving Daniel with more questions than answers and the strange, unfamiliar feeling of having been seen, actually seen by another human being. She watched him disappear into the flow of afternoon pedestrians, then looked down at her hands. They were trembling slightly, and not from cold. The library closed at 8, which gave Daniel 3 hours to kill the afternoon before she could claim her evening territory. The reading room on the 3rd floor where the homeless regulars gathered in an unspoken agreement with the staff, who pretended not to notice as long as everyone stayed quiet and left before closing. She walked the 6 blocks with her head down, counting steps because counting was meditative, because numbers didn't judge or demand or expect anything except acknowledgement. The Boston Public Library was democracy in architectural form. Columned entrance, marble lions flanking the doors, interior spaces that smelled like old books and floor polish, and the accumulated weight of human knowledge. Daniel loved it with the fierce, protective love of someone who'd found sanctuary in unexpected places. She showed her library card, free, available to all residents, address not required, to the security guard who nodded her through, then climbed the stairs to the 3rd floor where the reading room waited. Sarah was already there, camped at her usual table with a stack of magazines she was pretending to read. At 47, she'd been homeless longer than Daniel, had the weathered skin and careful movements of someone who'd learned survival through trial and error and pain. They weren't friends exactly. Friendship required vulnerability neither could afford. But they were allies, and in Daniel's current existence that mattered more. You look like you saw a ghost, Sarah said without looking up from her magazine. Daniel sank into the chair across from her, let her backpack slide to the floor. Maybe I did. Can't tell anymore. That kind of day. Sarah turned a page. Soup Kitchen on Broadway is serving early tonight. 5 instead of 6. Thought you should know. Information economy. The currency of survival. Daniel filed this away in the mental map she kept constantly updating. Where food was available when, which shelters had open beds, which streets to avoid after dark, which businesses let you use their bathroom without buying anything, which police officers would move you along with warnings versus arrests. Navigation required constant attention, constant adjustment. One wrong turn, one missed meal, one night in the wrong location could spiral into disaster faster than most people could imagine. Thanks. You going? Maybe. Depends if my feet forgive me for the walking I did today. Sarah finally looked up, her eyes sharp despite the exhaustion written in the lines around them. You hear about the memorial service tomorrow? For Jimmy. Jimmy. The name hit Daniel like cold water. Jimmy Martinez, 63, veteran, storyteller, harmonica player, and fixture of the downtown crossing underpass where he'd slept for 7 years. She'd talked to him just last week, shared a sandwich she'd gotten from a kind stranger, listened to him play Amazing Grace on his battered harmonica while people hurried past as if neither of them existed. What happened? Hypothermia. Last night. Someone found him this morning. Sarah's voice was flat, emotion carefully excised. Memorials at noon, Common Ground Community Church. They're good people. Actually show up for us. Daniel felt the news settle into her bones, adding to the accumulated weight of loss that homelessness carried like invisible luggage. Jimmy made 3 people she'd known, talked to, shared space with, who died on the streets in the 2 years since she'd joined their ranks. 3 names added to the list she kept in her head, her private memorial to lives the city forgot before they were even gone. I'll be there, she said quietly. They sat in silence after that, the companionable quiet of people who understood that sometimes there were no words, sometimes there was just the shared act of surviving another day and bearing witness to those who hadn't. Around them, the library hummed with subdued activity. Students studying, elderly patrons reading newspapers, the occasional tourist consulting guidebooks. Normal life continuing its normal patterns while Daniel and Sarah occupied the margins, present but peripheral. At 7:30, Daniel pulled out the photograph. She did this sometimes when the weight got too heavy, when she needed to remember why she was still fighting, still trying, still refusing to let the streets grind her down completely. Her mother's face smiled up at her. Younger than Daniel was now, wearing the blue dress, standing beside a piano in the living room of their old apartment. Daniel was 7 in the photo, gap-toothed and grinning, hands poised over keys she'd barely learned to reach. "That your mom?" Sarah asked, leaning closer. "Yeah, she was a piano teacher. Taught me everything she knew. She'd be proud of you. Still surviving. Still here." Daniel wasn't sure about that. Pride seemed like a luxury reserved for accomplishments that extended beyond basic existence. But she appreciated the sentiment, so she nodded and tucked the photo away carefully, zipping the plastic bag closed against moisture and time. When the library lights flickered at 8:45, 15-minute warning before closing, Daniel and Sarah gathered their belongings with practiced efficiency. No rushing, but no lingering either. Staff appreciated when the homeless regulars respected boundaries, and that goodwill was worth maintaining. Outside, the November night had turned sharp, temperature dropping as darkness solidified. They stood on the library steps for a moment, 2 figures silhouetted against the warm light spilling from inside. "Stay safe," Sarah said, already turning toward the shelter on Albany Street where she'd try for a bed. "You too." And then Daniel was alone again, backpack settled, hands jammed in her jacket pockets against the cold, trying to decide where to spend the night. The underpass near South Station if she wanted company and relative safety in numbers. The alcove behind the church on Boylston if she wanted solitude and risk. The 24-hour McDonald's if she could nurse a $1 coffee and stay awake through the night shift manager's suspicious glares. She started walking, letting her feet decide, and ended up at the community center on Tremont Street. It was closed, obviously, lights off, doors locked, everything shut down until morning. But she stood outside anyway, looking at the banner that stretched across the entrance. Community music night, Tuesdays 6 to 9 p.m. All welcome. All welcome. Daniel pressed her hand against the cold glass of the door. Imagined she could feel the piano waiting somewhere inside, sleeping like the swan boats, like Jimmy, like all the dreams deferred and abandoned and lost. Tuesday was 4 days away. 4 days of surviving. 4 days of carrying the weight. 4 days of being invisible. She could make it 4 more days. She had to, because music was the only country where she still held citizenship, and she'd been in exile too long. Daniel woke before dawn in the alcove behind Trinity Church, her body stiff from concrete and cold, her breath visible in the gray light that preceded sunrise. She'd learned to sleep light and wake fast, survival skills that had become instinct. Around her, the city was beginning its morning transformation, delivery trucks rumbling past, early commuters appearing like shadows, the urban landscape shifting from night territory to day territory with all the invisible border changes that came with it. She rolled her sleeping bag tight, compressed it back into her pack, and ran through her mental checklist. Bathroom. Library wouldn't open for 3 hours, but the Starbucks on Boylston would let her use their facilities if she bought something. Food. 2 granola bars left from the care package the church had distributed last week. Water. Bottle half full. Fountain at the common could top it off. Phone. 38% battery. Money. $4.63 in her pocket. Everything she had in the world. The city woke around her as she walked, light bleeding into the sky like watercolor, painting the buildings in shades of gold and amber. Daniel loved this hour, the brief window when Boston belonged to everyone and no one, when the streets were still quiet enough to hear your own thoughts, when possibility felt like something tangible rather than an abstract concept for other people. She walked with purpose, even though she had nowhere specific to go, because purposeful walking attracted less attention than aimless drifting. At Starbucks, she bought the smallest coffee they sold, $2.75 plus tax, leaving her with less than $2, and used the bathroom to wash her face, brush her teeth with the travel toothbrush she kept wrapped in paper towels, and change her shirt. The mirror showed her what others saw. A young woman with tangled dark hair pulled into a ponytail, hollow cheeks that had been round once, gray eyes that had learned to look without seeing, to observe without engaging. She looked tired. She looked hungry. She looked like exactly what she was. Back outside, coffee warming her hands if nothing else, Daniel walked to the common and found her fountain. The water was cold and metallic tasting, but it was free and safe, and those two qualities mattered more than flavor. She filled her bottle, drank half, filled it again. Hydration was crucial. The free clinics all said so during their outreach visits, handing out pamphlets about street survival to people who'd graduated from reading pamphlets to living the reality they described. Jimmy's memorial was at noon, which gave her 5 hours to kill. Daniel spent them walking because walking was free and kept her warm and made her look like she belonged somewhere, even if that somewhere was just the space between destinations. She walked through the public garden, where Marcus Whitfield's bench sat empty at this early hour. She walked past the Symphony Hall, where the service entrance was locked and silent. She walked through neighborhoods that had transformed from working class to wealthy in the span of decades, watching gentrification in architectural form, new construction rising between old buildings like teeth in an uneven smile. At 11:30, she headed toward Common Ground Community Church, a small brick building sandwiched between a bodega and a law office, unremarkable except for the rainbow flag hanging beside its entrance and the hand-painted sign that read, "All are welcome here," without asterisks or conditions. Daniel had been here twice before, once for a community dinner that had served actual home-cooked food instead of institutional bulk cooking, once to use their shower program that opened every Thursday morning. The church was already filling with mourners, a mix of housed and unhoused, old and young, every ethnicity and background represented, because homelessness was democratic in its devastation. Daniel slipped into a pew near the back, nodding at faces she recognized. Carlos, who'd lost his construction job after an injury and never recovered financially. Linda, whose mental health issues had pushed her out of every support system until only the streets remained. Marcus, the elderly man from the park bench, who smiled when he spotted her and shifted to make room on his pew. "Didn't know you'd be here," Daniel whispered as she sat. "Jimmy and I went back 20 years, Marcus said quietly. "Different paths, same struggle. I was where you were once. Long time ago." Before Daniel could process this information, the service began. Reverend Patricia Morrison, 60, black, with a voice that could comfort and command in equal measure, stood at the front and spoke about Jimmy with the kind of specific detail that only came from actually knowing someone, from seeing them as human rather than statistic. She talked about his service in Vietnam, his love of harmonica music, his quick wit, his struggles with addiction, his pride in 7 years of sobriety before the streets claimed him. "Jimmy mattered," Reverend Morrison said, her voice filling the small space. "Not because of what he achieved or what he lost, but because he was here, because he lived, because he touched lives and told stories and played music that made people stop and listen, even if just for a moment. In God's eyes, there is no difference between the housed and the unhoused, between the wealthy and the poor, between those the world celebrates and those the world forgets. Jimmy was beloved. He was worthy. He was enough." Daniel felt tears tracking down her face before she realized she was crying. Beside her, Marcus handed her a tissue without comment, his own eyes wet. Around the church, others wept openly, mourning not just Jimmy but every loss the streets had taken, every friend who disappeared into the city's indifferent darkness, every life cut short by exposure and exhaustion and the grinding, relentless cruelty of having nowhere safe to rest. After the service, there was food. The church had provided sandwiches and soup, coffee and hot tea, distributed with dignity and without judgment. Daniel ate slowly, making the food last, talking with others who'd known Jimmy, sharing stories that became spontaneous memorial. Carlos talked about how Jimmy had taught him harmonica basics during long nights in the shelter. Linda described how Jimmy had shared his blanket with her during her first week on the streets, had talked her through the panic attack that had threatened to drown her. "He was good people," Linda said simply. "Better than most who have everything." Marcus caught Daniel as she was preparing to leave. "Walk with me? There's something I want to show you." Curiosity outweighed caution, so Daniel followed him out of the church, her backpack secure, her guard instinctively raised but not alarmed. Marcus walked slowly, favoring his left side, heading toward the Tremont Street Community Center. When they arrived, he pulled out a key ring and unlocked the door. "You work here?" Daniel asked, surprised. "Volunteer. 3 days a week. I run the music program." Marcus held the door open, gestured her inside. "Come on. You're not breaking in if I'm inviting you." The community center was exactly what its name suggested. A no-frills space dedicated to serving the neighborhood without pretension. Bulletin boards covered in flyers for ESL classes and job training programs. A small kitchen where cooking classes happened. An art room where seniors painted and kids did after-school projects. And in the back, through a set of double doors that Marcus pushed open with obvious pride, a room with 10 music stands, 3 guitars on wall mounts, a full drum kit behind a plexiglass barrier, and against the far wall, a piano. It wasn't a grand piano or even a particularly good piano. It was an upright Yamaha that had seen decades of use, its wood veneer scratched and faded, its keys showing the yellow of age. But it was tuned, Daniel could see fresh tuning marks, and it was real, and it was waiting. "Tuesday nights, 6 to 9, Marcus said. "But right now, it's Friday afternoon, and I'm the only one here for another hour. If someone wanted to play, I wouldn't object." Daniel stared at the piano, then at Marcus. "Why are you doing this?" "Because Jimmy's gone, and I can't do anything about that. Because you're here, and I can do something about that. Because music heals what nothing else can touch, and healing is always worth facilitating." He settled into a chair by the door. "Play Daniel Sullivan. Let me hear what you've been holding inside." She should have hesitated, should have questioned his motives or worried about strings attached or protected herself from the vulnerability of being witnessed. But her body was already moving toward the piano, drawn by gravity or memory or need. She set her backpack carefully against the wall, stood in front of the keys, and let her fingers hover above them, reacquainting herself with the geography of possibility. The first note she played rang out clear and true, and something in Daniel's chest cracked open like ice breaking on a winter river. She played scales first, warming up muscles and memory, then moved into simple pieces, Bach preludes, Mozart sonatas, music that felt like coming home. Her fingers remembered what her mind had tried to forget. The weight of the keys, the resistance and release, the way melody and harmony could build something beautiful from nothing but intention and touch. She didn't realize she was crying again until the tears made it hard to see the keys. But she kept playing, moving from classical to jazz, from jazz to improvisation, pouring 2 years of grief and loss and survival into sound. The music that came out wasn't polished or perfect. Her fingers were rusty, her timing off, her touch less controlled than it had been. But it was real. It was hers. It was everything she'd buried coming back to life in waves of sound. When she finally stopped, hands trembling and breath coming hard, the room was silent except for the last notes dying in the air. She turned to find Marcus wiping his own eyes. "You're not just good," he said quietly. "You're exceptional. What happened? Daniel? How did someone with your talent end up on the streets?" The question was asked gently, but it still felt like a wound being probed. Daniel stood, put careful distance between herself and the piano, picked up her backpack. Life happened. The usual story. Loss and bad luck and choices that seemed right until they weren't. The usual story. Marcus stood too, moving slowly. Everyone on the streets has a story, and no one wants to hear them. Too uncomfortable. Easier to pretend we don't see. "You were there," Daniel said, remembering his comment at the church. "You said you were where I am. 15 years ago, after my wife died and the medical bills took everything and I lost our house." Marcus looked out the window at the street beyond. "I was lucky. I had skills people valued, and I looked respectable enough that people gave me chances. I had white male privilege working in my favor, which I'm not proud of but I'm aware of. Got into transitional housing, got back on my feet, got this volunteer position that turned into part-time work. Not everyone gets that lucky. And you're telling me this because? Because Tuesday nights, that piano is yours if you want it. Because I can't fix homelessness, but I can make sure you have 3 hours a week where music is possible. Because sometimes that's enough. One piece of your old life preserved, to make the rest bearable. He walked to the door, paused with his hand on the frame. I'm here Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Saturdays, 9 to 5. You need anything, bathroom, water, just a place to sit inside for a while. You come find me. Understood. Daniel nodded, not trusting her voice. Good. Now I have to do actual work. Lock the door behind you when you leave. And then he was gone, leaving Daniel alone with the piano and the echo of her own music and the dangerous, fragile feeling of hope beginning to stir. She left 10 minutes later, locking the door as instructed, and walked back into the city with her hands still tingling from the keys, her mind full of melody. The streets looked different somehow, not better, not easier, but less absolute. As if the closed doors might not all be locked. As if invisible might not be the same as unseen. At the public garden, Daniel found her bench, Marcus's bench, and sat watching the empty swan boats and the darkening sky. Her coffee was long cold, her money almost gone, her next meal uncertain. Nothing about her circumstances had changed, but she'd played piano for the first time in 2 years, and that felt like something. Felt like enough to get through one more night. Saturday morning arrived gray and cold, temperature hovering just above freezing, the kind of weather that made every outdoor minute feel like endurance testing. Daniel had spent the night at the South Station underpass with 6 other regulars, everyone maintaining respectful distance, everyone understanding the unspoken rules of shared space. She'd slept in 2-hour increments, waking periodically to make sure her backpack was still secured to her body, still containing everything she owned. By 6 a.m., she was walking again, trying to generate warmth through movement. The city was quieter on weekends, fewer commuters, more tourists who wouldn't arrive until later. Daniel walked to the library, closed until 10 on Saturdays, and sat on its steps, eating one of her remaining granola bars slowly, making it last, trying not to think about the fact that food was becoming a critical concern. She had $1.88. Enough for nothing useful. Not enough for a meal, not enough for coffee, not enough for anything except perhaps a single apple from a street vendor if she could find one willing to break $1. The mathematics of poverty were brutal and exact. Every cent mattered, every decision carried weight, every miscalculation could mean going hungry. Daniel! She looked up to find Sarah hurrying toward her, moving faster than usual, her face animated in a way that suggested news. She climbed the library steps and sat down heavily beside Daniel, breathing hard. You hear about the job fair? Sarah asked without preamble. What job fair? Next Saturday. Convention center. They're doing a homeless-specific hiring event. Hotels, restaurants, warehouses, places looking for people willing to work with gaps in employment, willing to help with documentation. Sarah pulled a crumpled flyer from her pocket, smoothed it against her knee. I know it's probably bullshit, probably just for show. But some of us are going anyway. Can't hurt to try. Daniel took the flyer, read the details. The citywide employment initiative, partnering with local businesses and nonprofits, dedicated to connecting unhoused individuals with employment opportunities. Free professional clothing provided. Resume assistance available. Transportation vouchers for interviews. It read like every other well-intentioned program that promised change and delivered disappointment, but Sarah was right. What did they have to lose except time? And time was the one resource they had in abundance. I'll go, Daniel said, handing the flyer back. If nothing else, it's warm inside and they might have food. Sarah laughed, bitter and knowing. That's the spirit. Low expectations, lower disappointment. They sat together in comfortable silence, watching the city wake up around them. A young couple walked past pushing a stroller, the baby bundled against the cold. A man in running gear jogged by, expensive headphones in, completely absorbed in his private world. An elderly woman walked a small dog that wore a sweater that probably cost more than everything Daniel owned combined. Normal people living normal lives, unaware that they were being observed from the margins, that their everyday actions were being catalogued and studied by those for whom every day had become a luxury. You ever think about what you'd do? Sarah asked quietly. If you could just wave a magic wand and fix everything? Daniel considered the question. She'd thought about it constantly, especially in the early days when hope still felt possible rather than painful. but the specifics had blurred over time, worn down by the relentless present tense of survival. "I'd play piano," she said finally. "Professionally. Give lessons, maybe. Something where music is the center, where everything else builds around it instead of music being what gets sacrificed first." "You're lucky," Sarah said. "Having a thing you love that much. I had a job I was good at, office management, nothing fancy but steady, but I didn't love it. Was just paying bills. And when the bills became impossible and the job went away, there wasn't anything I missed except the security." She pulled her coat tighter. "But you've got something worth fighting for. That matters." The library doors opened at 10, and Daniel and Sarah were among the first inside, claiming their spots in the reading room, settling into the routine of pretending to read, while actually just existing in heated space for as long as they were allowed. Daniel pulled out a book from the library's collection, a biography of Clara Schumann she'd been reading in pieces, and let the words blur on the page while her mind wandered. The job fair was a week away. Tuesday's piano night was 3 days away. Jimmy's memorial was 2 days past. Her money would run out by tomorrow. These were the coordinates of her life now, mapped in proximity to meals and shelter and brief moments of purpose. She tried not to think further than a week ahead, tried not to imagine next month or next year, because that kind of thinking led to despair, and despair was quicksand. Once you sank in, getting out became exponentially harder. At 3:30, Daniel left the library and headed to the public garden, curious if Marcus would be there for his scheduled bench time. She found him already seated, thermos of coffee in hand, watching the pond with the expression of someone deep in thought. "Right on time," he said when she sat down. "You must have somewhere important to be." "Nowhere at all," Daniel admitted. "But I remembered you said this was your spot." "It is. Has been for 5 years. Ever since I got back on my feet enough to establish routines again." He poured coffee into the thermos cap, took a sip. "Routines are important when everything else is chaos. Small consistencies that anchor you." "Is that advice?" "Observation. But if it sounds like advice, feel free to take it that way." Marcus glanced at her. "You doing okay?" "Stupid question, I know. But I'm asking anyway." Daniel shrugged. "Same as everyone else. Surviving. Trying to make it to Tuesday." "The piano is waiting," Marcus said. "Hasn't been played since you left yesterday. I might have told a few people that Friday afternoons are reserved for a special project." He smiled. "If you wanted to make that a regular thing, there'd be no objections from me." The offer hung in the air between them, heavy with implication. Regular access to the piano. A standing invitation to a heated space. The acknowledgement that she mattered enough for accommodation. Daniel didn't know how to process generosity anymore. It felt suspect, weighted with invisible expectations, too good to trust. "Why?" she asked. "Why do you care? You don't know me. I know enough. I know you're talented and struggling and trying to maintain your humanity in conditions designed to strip it away. I know you loved someone who taught you piano, and that love is still alive in how you play. I know you're young enough that this doesn't have to be your forever, and old enough that, without help, it might be." Marcus screwed the cap back on his thermos. "And I know what it's like to be invisible, to stand in rooms full of people and feel like a ghost. If I can make you slightly more visible, give you space where you exist fully, that seems like something worth doing." Daniel felt her throat tighten. She looked away, focused on the pond where that same lone duck was paddling its endless circles. "I don't know how to accept help anymore. Everything feels like it comes with strings." "No strings. Just an old man who runs a music program and believes that access to art shouldn't be a privilege reserved for people with addresses." Marcus stood, gathering his things. "Tuesday night, 6 p.m. Or Friday afternoon around 3 if you want it quieter. Your choice, no pressure. The piano doesn't judge your circumstances, Daniel. It just wants to be played." After he left, Daniel sat for another hour, watching daylight fade into dusk, watching the temperature drop degree by degree. She thought about Marcus's words, about invisibility and routines and the small consistencies that anchored you. She thought about Tuesday night and Friday afternoons and the dangerous possibility that maybe, just maybe, something in her life could be predictable and good. Her stomach growled, reminding her that philosophical contemplation didn't address immediate physical needs. The soup kitchen on Broadway would be serving soon, but it was a 40-minute walk and her feet already ached from the day's constant movement. Still, food was non-negotiable, so she shouldered her backpack and started walking, joining the evening flow of people heading home to places they owned or rented, to warm rooms and full refrigerators and the luxury of privacy. The soup kitchen was busy when she arrived, the lines stretching around the building, a mix of regulars and new faces, everyone united by hunger and need. Daniel took her place at the back, hands jammed in pockets, watching the interactions around her. There was a hierarchy even here. Those who'd been homeless longer held informal authority, newcomers deferred, families with children got priority consideration. Everyone knew the rules without them being spoken. First time, the voice came from behind her, and Daniel turned to find a young woman about her age, maybe 25, with dreadlocks pulled back in a colorful scarf and eyes that held the particular wariness of someone still adjusting to street life. Her clothes were too clean, her backpack too new, her discomfort too obvious. "No," Daniel said. "Been coming here on and off for 2 years." "You? 3 weeks." The woman's voice cracked slightly. "Still can't believe this is real. Keep thinking I'll wake up and it'll be a nightmare." Daniel remembered that feeling, the surreal disconnection of early homelessness, when your brain couldn't reconcile your new reality with your old identity. It took months for the cognitive dissonance to fade, for street life to stop feeling like a temporary aberration and start feeling like your actual existence. "It gets easier," Daniel said, then immediately regretted the platitude. Nothing about homelessness got easier, you just got harder, more adapted, more resigned. I mean, you learn the systems, where to go, who to trust, how to navigate. "I'm Keisha," the woman said, offering her hand, "and I'll take any advice I can get because I'm completely lost." They shook hands, and Daniel felt the weight of unexpected responsibility. She wasn't qualified to mentor anyone. She was barely keeping herself alive. But Keisha's desperation was palpable, and Daniel remembered her own first weeks, the terror and confusion and overwhelming sense of being utterly alone in a city full of people. "First rule," Daniel said as the line moved forward. "Trust your instincts. If something feels wrong, it probably is. Second rule, protect your stuff. Never put your backpack down where you can't see it. Third rule, find your people. Not everyone on the streets is safe, but some are family. You figure out which is which." Keisha pulled out a small notebook and actually started writing this down, which would have been funny if it wasn't so heartbreaking. She was still operating from her old world's logic, where information was something you recorded and filed away, where note-taking was a reasonable response to life's challenges. Fourth rule, Daniel continued, routines and resources. Know when soup kitchens serve, when shelters have bed lotteries, when libraries open where you can get free coffee. Map everything. Your survival depends on knowing more about this city than people who actually live here. They reached the entrance, signed in with the volunteers, and moved into the dining area where long tables were set up cafeteria style. The food was basic but hot: beef stew, bread rolls, salad that was mostly iceberg lettuce, coffee, or juice. Daniel loaded her tray and found a seat, Keisha following like a shadow. "What did you do?" Keisha asked after they'd both eaten a few bites. If that's okay to ask. "Musician. Piano. I was supposed to go to Juilliard." Daniel stirred her stew, watched the vegetables swirl in gravy. "My mother got sick. I stayed to help. Scholarship got deferred then lost. She died. Everything fell apart. Standard tragedy." "I'm sorry." Keisha's sympathy was genuine, her eyes welling up. "That's awful. What about you?" "Medical debt. I got pneumonia, didn't have insurance, hospital bills bankrupted me. Lost my apartment, lost my job because I couldn't work while recovering, ended up here." Keisha wiped her eyes. "My family lives in Georgia. They don't know. I'm too ashamed to tell them." Daniel understood that shame, the particular humiliation of having failed so completely that admitting it to people who knew you before felt impossible. She'd lost touch with the few friends she'd had stopped answering her father's occasional texts until they stopped coming, had constructed walls between her current reality and her former life so high that climbing back seemed impossible. "Shame is expensive," Daniel said. "It costs energy you need for survival. Not saying you have to tell anyone, just saying don't let shame be another thing you're carrying." They finished eating in silence. Then Keisha asked if Daniel knew where the nearest shelter was, if she should try for a bed or find somewhere outside. Daniel walked her through the options. The women's shelter on Albany Street that required lottery entry by 5 p.m. Already too late today. The overflow shelter at the church that opened when temperatures dropped below freezing, which tonight they wouldn't quite reach. The various outdoor spots that offered relative safety, though none were truly safe for someone as new and vulnerable as Keisha. "There's an underpass near South Station," Daniel said finally. "It's where I'm staying tonight. There's usually 5 or 6 others, mostly regulars. It's not perfect, but it's better than being alone your first few nights." The relief on Keisha's face was painful to witness. "Thank you. Really. I've been so scared. Fear is smart, keeps you alert, but terror is paralyzing. Try to find the line between them." They walked to South Station together as full darkness settled over the city, streetlights flickering on in sequence like a chain of small fires. The underpass was already occupied when they arrived. Carlos and Linda were there, along with 3 others Daniel recognized by sight if not name. Everyone looked up as they approached, assessing the newcomer with practiced evaluation. "She's with me," Daniel said simply, and that was enough. She found a spot against the wall with enough room for 2, helped Keisha set up her sleeping bag, gave her the space closer to the wall because it was slightly more protected. Around them, the others settled in for the night, each person creating their small territory, their temporary claim on concrete and shadows. "Talk in the morning," Linda said from her spot 6 feet away. "For now, try to sleep." But sleep didn't come easily for Keisha. Daniel could hear her breathing, quick and shallow with fear and adrenaline and the shock of her new reality. Daniel understood. She remembered her own first nights, the hypervigilance, the certainty that she wouldn't survive, the grief for her old life that felt like physical pain. "It won't always feel this bad," Daniel whispered. "That's not the same as saying it gets good. But the rawness fades. You adapt. Humans are built for adaptation, even when we don't want to be." "How long did it take you to adapt?" Daniel considered lying, offering false hope. But Keisha deserved truth. 6 months before I stopped crying myself to sleep. A year before I stopped being surprised every morning that I was still alive. 2 years and I'm still adapting, still surviving, still here. Keisha was quiet for a long moment. "I don't want to adapt. I want my life back." Everyone here wants their life back. But wanting doesn't change circumstances. Action changes circumstances, and action requires accepting where you actually are instead of where you wish you were. Daniel adjusted her backpack under her head, makeshift pillow. "Get some sleep, Keisha. Tomorrow we figure out next steps." The night was long and cold and filled with the ambient noise of the city. Traffic overhead, distant sirens, the occasional shout from streets away, the breathing and shifting of other bodies sharing this concrete space. Daniel slept in fragments, waking every time someone moved, every time a sound penetrated her subconscious, every time her body reminded her that lying on concrete in November was a form of slow-motion harm. She woke finally to gray pre-dawn light and the sound of Carlos packing up his things. Sunday morning. The church would be open for services, which meant bathrooms and coffee and an hour of sitting in heated space. The library wouldn't open until 1. The soup kitchen wouldn't serve lunch until 3. The hours between now and then needed to be filled with something, walking, waiting, existing. Keisha woke disoriented and stiff, clearly in pain from sleeping on concrete for the first time. Daniel helped her roll up her sleeping bag, showed her how to compress it properly, explained the day's schedule and options. They walked to Common Ground Community Church together, arriving just as Reverend Morrison was unlocking the doors. "Morning, Daniel," the Reverend said warmly. "And who's this?" "Keisha. New to the area." Reverend Morrison's face softened with understanding. "Welcome, Keisha. Service starts at 10, but coffee and donuts are available now in the fellowship hall. Bathrooms down the hallway, First door on the right. Make yourself comfortable. The fellowship hall was already filling with the church's unhoused regulars. People who came as much for community and warmth as for spiritual sustenance. Daniel and Keisha got coffee and donuts. Proper donuts from a bakery, not the stale commodity kind, and found seats at one of the long tables. Marcus was there, talking with an elderly woman Daniel didn't recognize. He caught her eye and nodded, a simple acknowledgement that felt like validation. Is everyone here homeless? Keisha whispered. Some. Others are housed but struggling or just part of the community. This church doesn't segregate. Daniel sipped her coffee, savoring the warmth. They actually practice what they preach. Radical inclusion. No judgment. The service itself was short and focused on themes of justice and dignity. Reverend Morrison preaching about society's obligation to its most vulnerable members, about the sin of indifference, about love as action rather than sentiment. Daniel had heard variations of this sermon before, but it never stopped being powerful, never stopped making her feel seen in a world that worked hard to render her invisible. After the service, Marcus approached. Got a minute? They stepped outside, leaving Keisha talking with Linda about shelter options and resource mapping. The November sun was weak but present, taking some edge off the cold. Marcus pulled out a folded piece of paper from his coat pocket. Job posting, he said, handing it to Daniel. Community Center is looking for a part-time music assistant. 10 hours a week, minimum wage, helping with youth programs and maintaining the instruments. It's not much, but it's something. Thought you might be interested. Daniel stared at the paper, her hands trembling slightly. A job, income, structure, purpose. Everything she'd been surviving without for 2 years. Suddenly available as a possibility rather than a fantasy. I don't have an address for the application, she said. The practicality of logistics crushing the brief surge of hope. Use the community center's address. We've done it before for others in transition. And I'll be your reference, vouch for your skills. Marcus met her eyes. This isn't charity, Daniel. You're qualified. You're talented. You deserve a chance. Deserve. The word felt foreign. Daniel had stopped thinking in terms of deserving. Survival wasn't about merit, wasn't about fairness, wasn't about getting what you earned. It was random and brutal and indifferent to concepts like justice or fairness. Yes, deserve, Marcus said firmly. I know the streets teach you otherwise. They teach you that you're disposable, that you don't matter, that your humanity is conditional on your economic utility. But that's a lie. Your worth isn't determined by your circumstances. Daniel folded the paper carefully, tucked it into her pocket. I'll apply, but I'm not getting my hopes up. Fair enough. Hope is complicated when you're surviving. But possibility, that's different. This is possible, Daniel. Let yourself believe that much at least. They went back inside, where Keisha had collected a care package from the church, toiletries, a warm hat, a pair of gloves, granola bars, and a hand-drawn map of resources that someone had clearly spent time creating. She looked overwhelmed and grateful, clutching the bag like it contained treasure rather than necessities. They said I should come back next Thursday, Keisha told Daniel. There's a shower program and a clothing closet. And maybe I can volunteer, help with setup or something. Give back. Give back. Daniel understood the impulse, the need to be useful, to contribute, to prove you weren't just taking. It was self-preservation disguised as altruism, a way of maintaining dignity when everything else was stripped away. They left together, stepping back into the cold Sunday afternoon with no particular destination in mind. The city was quieter on Sundays. More families, fewer commuters, a different energy that felt both more welcoming and more alienating. Daniel and Keisha walked to the common and found an empty bench, sat watching people enjoy their weekend. Couples strolling hand in hand, children playing on the playground, tourists taking photos, everyone participating in the ordinary joy of free time. Can I ask you something? Keisha said after a while. Sure. Do you ever get angry? Like, rage angry at how unfair everything is? Daniel thought about this. Anger had been her constant companion in the early months, burning hot and purposeless, consuming energy she needed for survival. Eventually, she'd had to let it go. Not because the injustice became less, but because sustaining rage required resources she didn't have. I used to, she said. But anger is exhausting when you're already exhausted. Now it's more like resignation with occasional flashes of fury. Usually late at night when I can't sleep and I'm thinking about everything I've lost. I'm so angry, Keisha admitted, her voice shaking. Angry at the hospital for those bills. Angry at the system that lets this happen. Angry at everyone who walks past us like we're invisible. Angry at myself for ending up here. The self-anger is the most dangerous kind. It'll eat you alive if you let it. How do you stop it? Daniel didn't have a good answer. She'd never fully stopped blaming herself for the choices that had led here, the moments where different decisions might have produced different outcomes. But she'd learned to live with that blame, to carry it without letting it completely define her. You don't stop it completely, she said finally. You just learn to carry it alongside everything else. Like your backpack. It's heavy, but you get used to the weight. They sat in silence after that, two young women whose lives had been derailed by circumstances beyond their control, trying to figure out how to survive one more day in a city that had written them off as acceptable casualties of an economic system that valued profit over people. Daniel pulled out the job posting Marcus had given her, read through it again. 10 hours a week. Minimum wage. Music assistant. It wasn't enough to get off the streets. Even full-time minimum wage wouldn't cover Boston's rental market without roommates and a security deposit she couldn't begin to save. But it was a foothold. A tiny piece of stability in a life defined by chaos. A reason to wake up beyond mere survival. I'm going to apply for a job, Daniel said, more to herself than to Keisha. That's great. What kind of job? Music assistant at the community center. Helping with programs, maintaining instruments, that kind of thing. Daniel refolded the paper. It's probably a long shot, but I have to try. Can I come with you? When do you apply? I should start looking too. Figure out some kind of income. Keisha pulled out her notebook again. Started writing. What do I need? Resume? References? Address? Daniel walked her through the brutal practicalities of job hunting while homeless. The address problem, the phone number problem, the gap in employment problem, the lack of references problem, the appearance problem. Every step of the process was designed for people with resources, with stability, with the basic infrastructure of normal life. Adapting that process to street circumstances required creativity and luck and the willingness to disclose your homelessness to potential employers who might or might not hold it against you. It's possible though, Daniel said, trying to balance realism with hope. People do it. Get jobs, save money, eventually transition into housing. It's just really, really hard. Everything is really, really hard, Keisha said. Might as well try anyway. In the unforgiving streets of Boston, where November's bitter cold seeps through every layer of protection, a young woman named Daniel fights not just for survival, but for her soul. This is a story about dignity, talent, and the transformative power of music in the face of devastating loss. Daniel's journey to homelessness began with tragedy. The loss of her mother, a piano teacher who had nurtured her daughter's extraordinary musical gifts. In the 2 years since, Daniel has learned the brutal arithmetic of street life. Counting dollars and cents, measuring phone battery life like oxygen, calculating the hours between meals at soup kitchens. Yet despite sleeping on concrete under South Station's underpass and rationing her last granola bar, one thing remains unbroken, her connection to music. The story unfolds over several pivotal days, beginning when Daniel meets Keisha, a newly homeless young woman still raw from her recent eviction. Where others might turn inward, focus solely on their own survival, Daniel becomes Keisha's guide, teaching her the invisible rules of street life. Where to find safe bathrooms, which soup kitchens serve on which days, how to protect your belongings, when to accept the chaos of overflow shelters versus braving the cold outdoors. Their friendship represents something profound. In a world designed to dehumanize and isolate, they create community. They share information, warmth, and the basic acknowledgement of each other's humanity that society so often denies homeless individuals. Daniel's life takes a turn when Marcus, an elderly man she meets regularly at a bench in the public garden, offers her access to a piano at the community center where he volunteers. For Daniel, This isn't just about playing an instrument. It's about reclaiming her identity. The piano represents everything she's lost. Her mother's love, her former life, her sense of purpose beyond mere survival. Initially, pride makes her hesitate. She doesn't want to be anyone's charity case. But Marcus gently challenges this resistance, pointing out that refusing help when genuinely offered is its own expensive form of pride. He sees past her circumstances to her talent, treating her not as a homeless girl to be pitied, but as a musician who deserves to play. The narrative doesn't romanticize homelessness. We experience Daniel's reality in visceral detail, waking with frost coating her sleeping bag, her body aching from concrete, her face numb from cold. We feel her constant calculations, phone battery at 8%, $1.88 in cash, 3 days until the next guaranteed meal. We witness her humiliation when a businessman demands she give up an outlet she's using, when a coffee shop manager asks her to leave despite her half-full cup of coffee purchased with her last money. Yet through it all, Daniel maintains her dignity. When the businessman expects her to defer to him, she refuses, calmly asserting her equal right to the space. When Keisha despairs, Daniel offers hard-won wisdom wrapped in compassion. She understands that survival on the streets requires both fierce independence and the willingness to accept and offer help. The piano becomes Daniel's anchor. When she finally plays at the community center, starting with Rachmaninoff, the music pours out with an emotional intensity that transforms the room. Her fingers, strengthened by days of practice after 2 years of silence, create something transcendent. The piece she plays, the same one that was bleeding through Symphony Hall doors when she first became homeless, becomes a bridge between her past and present, between who she was and who she might become again. The audience's response is overwhelming. They rise to their feet, not with pity, but with genuine recognition of her artistry. A music professor gives her his card, inviting her to perform in a community concert series. Others approach with compliments and questions about technique. In that moment, she is seen not as a homeless girl, but as a talented musician who happens to be experiencing homelessness, a crucial distinction. Parallel to her musical journey, Daniel applies for a position at the community center, a job that could offer stability, income, and a path off the streets. Marcus recommends her, but she knows her application is one among many, her credentials thin with a 2-year gap that screams instability. The wait will be 2 weeks, 14 days she must survive before even knowing if she has a chance. This timeline illustrates the impossible catch-22 of homelessness. You need a job to afford housing, but you need housing to maintain a job. Every day becomes a test of endurance, every small victory. A charged phone, a warm meal, a night survived, a testament to resilience. Throughout the story, we meet others navigating the same struggle. Carlos, who shares his extra blanket on the coldest night. Linda and Sarah, veterans of street life who offer guidance. Teresa, who survived 5 years and dispenses practical wisdom. There's also the absent presence of Jimmy, a man who recently died on the streets, whose memorial service reminds everyone that these lives matter, that these stories deserve to be told. The homeless community Daniel inhabits operates on principles of mutual aid and shared knowledge. They tell each other about job fairs, free medical clinics, which churches offer what services. They watch out for each other, share resources, and create family where society has abandoned them. The story culminates on Tuesday night at the community center's open piano event. Daniel brings Keisha with her, and when her turn comes, she plays with everything she's been holding inside: grief, loss, stubborn hope, exhaustion, small victories. The Rachmaninoff flows through her hands with building passion, silencing the room completely. Keisha cries openly. Marcus beams with pride. Strangers recognize her humanity and talent. In that moment, Daniel reclaims something fundamental: her identity as an artist, her right to create beauty regardless of her circumstances, her connection to the passion that defined her life before tragedy struck. As Daniel and Keisha return to their sleeping spots under the South Station underpass, something has shifted. The cold is still brutal, the concrete still unforgiving, the future still uncertain. But Daniel carries something new, proof that she is more than her circumstances, that her talent and humanity persist despite 2 years of loss. She thinks about her mother's photograph in her backpack, about the piano waiting at the community center, about the job application sitting in a pile with dozens of others. She thinks about Carlos's words, "The streets only win if you stop fighting." As sleep comes in fragments, Daniel's fingers move unconsciously against her sleeping bag, tracing invisible keys, playing silent melodies. The music lives in her bones, her blood, in muscle memory that homelessness cannot erase. This narrative reminds us that homeless individuals are not statistics or problems to be solved. They are people with talents, dreams, histories, and an inherent dignity that circumstances cannot strip away. Daniel's story shows us that survival takes many forms. Sometimes it's finding warmth on a freezing night, sometimes it's helping someone newer to the streets learn the ropes, and sometimes it's sitting at a piano and reminding yourself, and the world, that you still exist beyond your circumstances. If this story moved you, please subscribe to our channel. We share powerful narratives about resilience, hope, and the strength of the human spirit in the face of overwhelming adversity. Hit the notification bell so you never miss our next story, and leave a comment below sharing your thoughts. Your support helps us continue creating meaningful content that celebrates the courage it takes to survive, to hope, and to remain fully human even in the darkest circumstances. Subscribe now and join our community of listeners who believe that every person's story, especially those society tries to silence, deserves to be heard, honored, and remembered.